بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى صحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين والعاقبة للمتقين اللهم اجعلنا منهم يا رب العالمين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين بك يا فتاح يا عليم وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We are in the session of the program called The Prophet's Fast, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as preserved in the Hanafi, Mālikī, and Shafi'i schools. And we're going to be reading from a text on Mālikī Fiqh that was written by contemporary scholars, all of them from Mauritania, who are living in the Emirates, and they put together a very, very beautiful primer on the rulings of fiqh. And we're going to go ahead and read from page 121 of that book. We're going to hopefully get through two sections of this book. One is related to the rulings of fasting, and the second is related to the rulings regarding i'tikaf, or seclusion in the masjid. And so, يقول المصنفون رحمهم الله تعالى كتاب الصوم. قال الله تعالى: شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the month of Ramadan is that in which the Quran was revealed as a guide for people and as a clarification of that guidance and as a criterion or standard. And so whosoever is present among you in that month, then let him fast. And there is an understanding of this verb shahida, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. There's an understanding of that word shahida as whosoever among you witnesses its entrance by seeing the crescent moon. But that understanding is not the primary understanding of that verse. And what shahida means is whoever is present, i.e. whoever is hadir and not musafir. Whoever is present in his city, then let him fast, and not the one who is traveling, because of course there is a dispensation for the one who is traveling. So that's one understanding of this word shahida. حين يذكر رمضان يذكر الصيام حين يذكر رمضان يذكر الصيام والإمساك عن الحرام ويذكر القرآن ومن هنا كانت مدارسة القرآن في شهر رمضان مطلوبة أكثر من غيره. And so here he says, or they say, whenever Ramadan is mentioned, fasting is mentioned, and refraining from eating, or refraining from imsak an haram. Fasting is mentioned, and refraining from everything that's prohibited is mentioned, and the Quran is mentioned. And in this light, the study of the Quran in the month of Ramadan is desired, right, more than in other months, right? It is especially desired in Ramadan. وَالصَّوْمُ عِبَادَةٌ رُوحِيَّةٌ تعلم الأخلاق الكريمة كالصدق والأمانة والوفاء والإخلاص وتورث التقوى ومراقبة الله. And fasting is a spiritual worship which teaches virtuous character like truthfulness, trustworthiness, loyalty, and sincerity. And it also bequeaths taqwa. Right? It bequeaths taqwa and watching vigilantly for where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content and where He is discontent. وحكمة مشروعيته, and the wisdom for its legislation is مخالفة النفس وحفظ الجوارح من الشرور والآثام والتشبه بالملائكة الكرام وتنبيه العبد على مواساة الجائعين. And so the wisdom, some of the wisdoms to be gleaned behind its legislation are to struggle against the ego, to preserve the limbs and the senses, the faculties and the organs from all evil and sins, and also to get the person to resemble the angels, the noble angels, and to empathize with those who do not have the means to eat and drink, right? With the poor and the downtrodden and the destitute. وَالصَّوْمُ لُغَةً, and fasting in terms of the lexical definition of it, مُطْلَقُ الْإِمْسَاكِ وَالْكَفُّ عَنِ الشَّيْءِ. Or مطلق الإمساك والكف عن الشيء, that it is categorical abstinence and refraining from something. So when you use the word sama, it means that you are categorically abstinent, and it doesn't matter abstaining from what. It could be abstaining from anything. That you're ana sa'imun an this. I'm fasting from this. I'm abstaining from that. So just like the word abstain or refrain is categorical, you can apply it to anything. You can also apply this word sama to pretty much anything. وقال الله تعالى حكاية عن السيدة مريم إني نظرت للرحمن صوما فلن أكلم اليوم إنسيا. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Lady Mary that I have vowed, she says, I have vowed to the Lord of compassion a fast, and I will not speak to any human being this day. Right? And that's in Surah Maryam. The verse is number 26. And we spoke about that verse in our session. وشرعا هو الإمساك عن شهوتي البطن والفرج وما يقوم مقامهما. And technically speaking, in the nomenclature of our fiqh, it is refraining from the two desires of the stomach and the privates, and whatever takes the place of that which we are refraining from regarding the stomach and the privates, right? Or that which we can analogize to what we are refraining from regarding the stomach and the privates. And what that means there is that you have the stomach and the privates are what, at this base level of the legal fast, what renders a fast legally valid is abstaining with the stomach and the privates from food and drink with the stomach and from conjugal relations with the privates. Now, food and drink and conjugal relations, those can be extended to other things, right? So when he says وَمَا يَقُومُ مَقَامَهَا وَمَا يَقُومُ مَقَامَهُمَا, those can be extended to other things that have to do with the stomach and the privates. What are those things? Injections, for example, like IV injections that go right into the stomach, or right into the veins where you are being nourished, when you are being nourished, or a feeding tube, for example. So that is what takes the place of the food and drink that enters the stomach, and it is also refraining from that. And then there are other acts that one can engage in that are not conjugal relations with one's spouse that also have the same ruling that we are refraining from those acts as well, right? بنية التقرب إلى الله تعالى من طلوع الفجر إلى غروب الشمس, with the intention of drawing closer unto Allah the Exalted from the time that the Fajr comes in until the sun sets. فيما عدا زمن الحيض والنفاس وأيام الأعياد, with the exception of the period of time that a woman is on her cycle, or postpartum bleeding after birth, right? Or the days of Eid, right? وهو فرض عين على المكلف, and it is an individual obligation on everyone who is legally qualified to fast. And the legal qualifications for fasting are that you must be Muslim, you must be at the age of puberty, and you must also be of sound mind. Right, so if a person's insane, for example, or not Muslim, or younger than the age of puberty, then it's not an obligation for him. And fardu ayn means on every single person, so no one can fast for you. You must fast for yourself. And so I just want to give you all the opportunity while we're going through this to be able to ask questions. And you're able to pull up the text side by side. That's fine. If you want, we can actually pull it up if that's preferable. Do we have more people on here, or do you want to continue the way we are? It would really help. Let's see here. I'm going to do a gallery set. It would really help if most of you could turn on your cameras. That way, if I'm querying you, or if you want to ask a question or something like that, we're actually in an in-class session here, and so it feels much more like a classroom when more of you are online. And so, what is your preference? Those of you who have your cameras on, what is your preference? That we share the document, or that we continue the way we have been? Share the document. Continue how we are. Okay, all right, very good. I just have to set this up somehow. Oh, I can do a pop-out chat. So if I do a pop-out chat, I'll be able to see your questions when you write them. And how do I do that? How do I get the chat to pop out? Okay, how do we do that? Because I really can't see if you're writing questions, because I've got the document open in front of me. There is a way I can do this. Hold on. Okay. All right. I got it. Very good. Alhamdulillah. So please do include your questions in the chat box, and I'll check it from time to time. And then he says, وَلِلصَّوْمِ رُكْنَانِ. And fasting, there are two what are called rukn for fasting. And the rukn is basically, if it's not there, then the entire ritual is invalid, right? وَلِلصَّوْمِ رُكْنَانِ. There's just two arkan for the fasting, right? An-niyya, right? Intention. If a woman is on her cycle, what can she do to compensate for being on her cycle, aside from making up the days that she did not fast? This is a very good question. And so if a woman is on her cycle, and we're going to get to some of this, so I'd like you guys to ask the questions as they come, and I'll answer them either immediately or later on. But this question here, if a woman is on her cycle, then she is to make up that day. And there is no fidya, and fidya is basically what a person pays to expiate for a missed day, and that payment would be in the form of feeding one indigent person, one person who is without food, and it's about $10 for a person to pay forward for that. Now, a woman who has missed her days because of her cycle is only meant to make up the days within the year, right? Within the year. She has the entire year before the next Ramadan to make up those days of her cycle. Now, if the next Ramadan comes and she has not made up her days, then she is to make up those days after that Ramadan and to pay the fidya for the days that she missed. And the reason that she's made to pay the fidya is because she prolonged the period of time wherein she could have made it up, right? And so hopefully that's clear. النية وشرطها الليل قبل الفجر أو معه، وتكفي نية واحدة طول الشهر، ويستحب تجديدها كل ليلة، كما تكفي نية واحدة في كل صوم يجب تتابعه. That the intention is the first rukn. And its condition, the condition of the intention, is that it must be made at night before the Fajr of Ramadan, right? Or before the Fajr of the day that you're fasting, whether it's Ramadan or the day that you're fasting, if the day that you're fasting is a mandatory fast. So there are three mandatory fasts. The one is Ramadan. Another is another, which you take as an oath that I swear I'm going to fast on such and such a day, and this is an oath that you take with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the day that you are intending to fast as an expiation for a missed day in Ramadan. So for those three, the intention has to be made at night. The intention must be made at night. For a voluntary fast, you can make that intention after Fajr, no problem. But it's better to make it at night. But for these mandatory fasts, they must be made at night before the entrance of Fajr, or along with the adhan of Fajr. So along with the adhan of Fajr, that's when you make that intention, or before. وَتَكْفِي نِيَّةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ طُولَ الشَّهْرِ. And one intention for the entire month suffices you, right? It suffices you that I intend to fast all of the month of Ramadan. And that's nothing that you say on the tongue. In the Mālikī madhab, the intention مَحَلُّهَا الْقَلْبِ. And there's no intention that is articulated on the tongue for fasting or for prayer or for anything except Umrah or Hajj. The intention for Umrah or Hajj, that is to be verbally articulated once you mount your camel or your donkey, right, or your taxi, or the bus, right. So once you go back and mount, that's when you make that intention after entering into ihram. And that intention, after wearing the clothing of ihram, but that intention, by saying that, the labbaik Allahumma bi umrah or labbaik Allahumma bi hajj, that is the entrance into ihram and not the wearing of the clothing of ihram. So the point here is that the intention is in the heart, not articulated on the tongue. And I believe the Ahnaf, they stipulate that the intention must be on the tongue as well, for the prayers and for the fasting. But let me not say what I'm not sure about with respect to the fasting. I know that that's the case for the prayer, but for the Malikis, the intention's in the heart. You can have just one intention for the entire month, whereas in the Shafi'i madhab, you have to have that intention renewed every single night, right? Every single night you renew that intention throughout Ramadan. But for the Malikis, it's just one intention at the beginning of the month and you're good. But يُسْتَحَبُّ تَجْدِيدُهَا كُلَّ لَيْلَةٍ. And to renew that intention every month, every night, right, is mustahab. It is recommended, or it is liked, it is encouraged, but it is not necessary. Whereas it is absolutely necessary in the other madhahib, or else the day does not count. كما تكفي نية واحدة في كل صوم يجب تتابعه. Just like an intention. One intention is okay for every fast where you have 2 or 3 days in a row. One intention is good for that, for those fasts as well, outside of Ramadan. الكف عن المفطرات من طلوع الفجر للغروب is the other rukn, is that, okay, now that you've got that intention, you must now follow through with it and not eat or drink or have conjugal relations with your spouse from the time that Fajr comes in all the way until the sun sets. Those are the two arkan of the fasting. وَيَجِبُ بِشَرْطَيْن. And it is mandatory given two conditions. Al-bulugh, which is puberty, right? That a man or a woman must enter into the age of puberty where it becomes binding now. وَالْقُدْرَةُ عَلَى الصَّوْمِ. And the ability to fast. You have to have the physical ability to fast in order for the fast to be in order for the fast to be wajib, right? So these are the two conditions that establish the obligatoriness, the obligation. These are two conditions that establish the obligation of fasting, that you are obliged to fast once you hit puberty and if you have the ability to do so. And then you have conditions, two conditions for when the fast is valid, right? For when the fast is valid. So let's say you've reached puberty, you have the ability to do it. What then renders your fast valid and accepted? The first is that you've got to have Islam, al-Islam. You have to be Muslim, right? Your fast is not accepted if you have not taken your shahada, right? Because then it's just a diet, right? You're just dieting at that point. So that's the first. And then az-zaman al-qabil lis-sawm, right? Which is the time that the period of time in which fasting can actually be engaged. And that is from Fajr to Maghrib, and that is also for a woman when she is not on her cycle, right? Those days where she is not on her cycle, those days are those days are the days that are prescribed for a woman to engage the fast, and so the other days, right? The fasting is not valid. So if she's fasting while on her cycle, that fasting is not valid. It is not accepted. It is basically a diet. She's just skipped a few meals, but she's got to make those days up because the time itself is not allotted for the fast. And this is to give the woman a sense of relief and a sense of ease, so that she is not required to fast on top of her cycle. وشروط الوجوب, but there's no choice in the matter as well. There's no choice in the matter. وشروط الوجوب, and her not fasting, we should say this, and her not fasting while she's on her cycle is her worship, right? And she is rewarded for that. She's rewarded for not fasting on her cycle because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have prescribed, and by her obeying Allah and His Messenger in that, she's rewarded for it. And then she makes up the days later. And one of the things that I'd like to tell the husbands who are out there is the days that your wife is making up her fast with her, right? Make that intention, inshallah, that you approach your wives and you say to them, basically, whatever days you are going to be making up, let me know and I'll make them up with you. وَشُرُوطُ الْوُجُوبِ وَالصِّحَّةِ مَعًا. And then you have conditions of obligation and conditions of validity together, right? So this is where it becomes obligatory to fast and valid, right? Where both of these come together. And that is al-aql, which means that you must be of a sound mind, that if you're of a sound mind, it's obligatory to fast and your fast is accepted. And then dukhul Ramadan, that Ramadan has to actually enter. That once it enters, it becomes obligatory to fast and your fasting is accepted. وَالنَّقَاءُ مِنْ دَمِ الْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ. And that a woman must be clear of the blood of her cycle and the blood of her postpartum period. So that once that's clear, then it's obligatory for her to fast and her fast is accepted. And then thubutu Ramadan. Now that we've mentioned Ramadan, how do we know that Ramadan is actually in? يَثْبُتُ الصِّيَامُ بِأَحَدِ أُمُورٍ أَرْبَعَةٍ. That fasting is established by one of four points here. بِإِكْمَالِ شَعْبَانَ 30 يَوْمًا. That once we recognize that Sha'ban has reached 30 days, right? When we've counted 30 days for Sha'ban, then we know that the next day is Ramadan, and we have the intention that night to fast the next day, regardless of whether you see the moon or not, regardless of whether it's overcast that day or not. Once you know that Sha'ban has completed its 30th day, then tomorrow's Ramadan, no doubt about it. بِرُؤْيَةِ عَدْلَيْنِ فَأَكْثَرَ لِلْهِلَالِ. When two people of integrity, right, when two people of honesty and integrity view the crescent moon. Then you know that the month has come in. So let's say you have less than two people, and two people here. This is coming from the verse in the book of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala with respect to the two witnesses for any for any event, right? That comes before a judge. That you have to have two reputable and honorable witnesses. So this here is adlain, two honest people, right, who see the hilal. So once that happens, then the entire city is made to fast, or the entire country, or the entire because it's based on ittihad al-matla. If there's ittihad al-matla, if basically we're in a region where we say that we are going to go by a regional sighting of the moon or a global sighting of the moon, once you have two people who are of honest caliber and integrity, then the fasting becomes an obligation on all. Now, let's say you just have one person. Let's say you just have one person, and it was not established that anyone else saw it. Then you wait the next day. However, the person who saw the hilal, he must fast. He must fast the next day. Everyone else fasts a day later, right? A day later, because he saw it and he's certain of what he saw. But because we have less than two, we are going to wait another day, and then we'll have many more people. No. And then برؤية جماعة مستفيضة. And then when you have many people say we saw the moon, right? Then among them you're going to have people of integrity and people who are less than that, right? People who are cheaters, you're going to have all kinds of people, but it's just so many people that they could not have conspired to lie about it. Then you say, okay, all right, so tomorrow's Ramadan, let's fast. And that's number 3. And then number 4, برؤية عدل واحد وتوجبه على من لا اعتناء لهم برؤية الهلال. And so if you have one person, we mentioned this already, if you have one person who sees it, it is an obligation upon him. على من لا اعتناء لهم برؤية الهلال. It is an obligation upon him in a community where they are not used to actually seeing the hilal all the time. However, this is an important qualification. But if they are accustomed to seeing the hilal all the time, like they go out every month and they're accustomed to seeing the hilal, and this is a community of people that we know what we're doing, right? We know how we're doing this. Then his testimony is enough. His testimony suffices for the beginning of the month. But if it's in an area where they're not, where we just go by our phones, right? Or Google Calendar says that Ramadan is Tuesday, so we're just going to fast Tuesday. If that's the case, then that man's seeing the moon is an obligation for him to fast, but not for all of the rest of us. ولا يثبت بقول منجم ولو وقع في القلب صدقه لأن الله أناط الصوم والفطرة برؤية الهلال لا بوجوده. All right. And it is not established by the assertion or the position or the claim of an astronomer, even if you have a feeling of trust that he knows what he's talking about. He's an astronomer. He knows what he's talking about, right? But it's not established because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined fasting and the breaking of fast by the sighting of the moon and not by its mere presence, not by its birth, in other words. So if we are calculating when the moon is born, right, that's irrelevant because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not oblige us to fast when the moon is born. And the Prophet ﷺ did not oblige us to do that either. He obliged us to fast when the moon is actually sighted. And I know that this is a point of contention, obviously. I mean, every year we get into this thing, although it's less and less now because of a lot of meetings that are happening behind closed doors where they're trying to really just, get their acts together, to say the least. the if we insist on going by when the moon is born, this is something that, just consider this. If we insist on going by when the moon is born, then most of the fasting of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his companions was a day late. And most of the fasting of the Prophet himself and his companions, most of the Eids, was also a day late. If we're saying that the month is defined by when the moon is actually born and not when it is sighted by the naked eye, right? So that's a claim that I'm not ready to make, right? And so we go by the naked eye sighting, and here there's going to be the difference as to whether, okay, should it be sighted in the Western Hemisphere or in the Eastern Hemisphere, in the Northern Hemisphere, and these are all arbitrary lines. And one of the things that we have been blessed to reach as a conclusion, from at the behest of my teachers and their research as well, is that anywhere in the world today, anywhere in the world that the moon is actually sighted by the naked eye, fasting, the month has started, right? The month has started, and it's good to fast that next day, and not to insist on waiting to see it in Pennsylvania. It wasn't seen in Pennsylvania. Well, who drew that line out of the map and called it Pennsylvania? I mean, these are all arbitrary lines, right? And the same thing we're just going to go by America and not North America or South America. I mean, these are all political boundaries that are drawn. Like if you look at the Earth, right? If you look at a picture of the Earth, there are no such lines on the Earth. It's just on maps. But the Earth doesn't have such lines or divisions. قال الله تعالى فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whosoever is present among you during the month shall fast. And the placement of this verse here is problematic, right? Because the reason that they've placed it here is because they've defined the word shahida as shahada. Whoever witnesses with the eye the month, then let him fast. And that's an interesting read of it, but again, it's just not the primary understanding of that verse. Shahida literally means the one, or primarily means, and this is in the understanding of the Mufassirin, that it means whoever is present in his residence, right, in his city of residence. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم صوموا لرؤيته وأفطروا لرؤيته فإن غبي عليكم فأكملوا عدة شعبان 30 وفي رواية فاقدروا له. And because the Prophet ﷺ said, fast when you see it, and break your fast when you see it. And if you are unable to see it, right, because of the clouds or something like that at night, or after Maghrib, then complete Sha'ban as 30 days. Right? Then complete Sha'ban as 30 days. That's what we're on. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, and that's what we do. وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ فَقْدُرُوا لَهُ. And in another narration, then calculate 30 days for Sha'ban, and just add another day. ولا صيام يوم الشك ليحتاط به ولا يجزئ صومه عن رمضان ولو ثبت أنه منه لتردد النية وعدم جزمها. So the day of doubt, right? So is tomorrow Ramadan or is the Ramadan the next day? That's the doubt, right? So tomorrow is the day of doubt, right? Well, is that the case? Yeah, tomorrow. So tomorrow is the day that we're supposed to go out and see the whether the moon is there. So it's a day of doubt, right? Basically tomorrow night. So basically that means that Monday night is when we're supposed to go out and see the moon, because we're still in Sha'ban. But Monday night, that could be the Monday night could be the beginning of Ramadan, and could also be the end of Sha'ban. It could be like Monday night and then Monday daytime. That daytime of Monday night, basically Tuesday Eve, the day right before sunset on Tuesday. You guys all understand what I'm saying? Monday during the day could be the 1st of Ramadan, and it could also be the 30th of Sha'ban, right? Based on whether we see the moon on Monday or not. So if that's the, wait a minute, let's see. We're into Tuesday, sorry. So Monday night we're talking about Tuesday day. Tuesday day could be the 1st of Sha'ban, or it could be the Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Tuesday day could be the 1st of Ramadan, and it could also be the 30th day of Sha'ban. So that is what is called the day of doubt, Yawm al-Shak. وَلَا يُصَامُ يَوْمُ الشَّكِّ لِيُحْتَاطَ بِهِ. And the day of doubt should not be fasted in order just to be precautionary, right? That I'm just going to fast it just in case, right? That's haram. You cannot do that. You cannot fast with the intention of it being Ramadan, and you don't even know if it's Ramadan. Right, because our acts of worship are based in certainty. وَالْيَقِينُ لَا يَزُولُ بِالشَّكِّ. And this is one of the maxims, the legal maxims, that certainty is not, it does not give sway when there's doubt. Right? It does not yield to doubt. Certainty does not yield to doubt. And so if you're not certain about something, then your act of worship that is based in doubt is not accepted. It's not accepted. None of our acts of worship are accepted if they're based in doubt. And that's according to the overwhelming majority of the Mālikī scholars. And so, وَلَا يُصَامُ يَوْمُ الشَّكِّ لِيُحْتَاطَ بِهِ. Right? So, as a precautionary measure, you cannot just fast and say, just in case it's Ramadan, I'm going to fast it. وَلَا يُجْزِئُ صَوْمُهُ عَنْ رَمَضَانَ وَلَوْ ثَبَتَ أَنَّهُ مِنْهُ. And if he fasts that day, let's say Tuesday is the day of doubt. If you fast Tuesday and it ends up being Ramadan, you still have to make it up. You've got to make it up because you did not fast with, you should, you're fasting on a day of doubt where that's not acceptable. And secondly, you don't even know if it's Ramadan while you're fasting. It just becomes clear to you afterwards that it was Ramadan, and you say, I got that in. I'm glad I got that in. No, you've got to make that up because you didn't have it in. Your intention was for Ramadan where it could have been Sha'ban, right? لِتَرَدُّدِ النِّيَّةِ وَعَدَمِ جَزْمِهَا. Because of the indecision in the intention and the doubt in the intention and the lack of resolution on the matter. وَيَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ الْإِمْسَاكِ. However, if you've done that, if you've fasted thinking that I'm just going to be precautionary about this, I'm just going to fast just in case, you must continue that fast. Because you began an act of worship and you must continue in that act of worship, but then you make it up later because it wasn't Ramadan for you. Although it was Ramadan for everyone else, it was not Ramadan for you. It was a day of doubt for you. And so you've got to continue with that fast. And the Mālikīs are particularly strict about finishing what you set yourself to do, right? That if you've started an act of worship, you see it through till the very end. And you'll see that in a lot of the ahkam of the Mālikīyah. وَيَجُوزُ صَوْمُهُ, right? وَيَجُوزُ صَوْمُهُ إِنْ صَادَفَ عَادَةً أَوْ نَذْرًا أَوْ قَضَاءً أَوْ كَفَّارَةً أَوْ تَطَوُّعًا بِلَا عَادَةٍ, right? However, you can fast the day of doubt if it coincides with an oath that you have taken to fast, right? That I'm going to fast this day as an oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because then it's with a different intention. It's not the intention of Ramadan. Or if you are making up a day, right? Let's say you're making up a day, or you are, and you don't know. It's like the day of doubt, or it's a kafara. It's expiation, right? It's expiation for something that you've done, like a sin that you've done, and you're now expiating for it. Or tatawu'an bila ada, or if it is a voluntary fast, right? If it is a voluntary fast, bila ada. So if it's just with any of those other intentions, that's fine. You can fast on Tuesday with any of those other intentions. However, not with the intention of Ramadan. You cannot layer your intentions and say, I'm going to fast this as an oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if it just so happens to be Ramadan, I'm just going to tag that onto the intention. If you do that, then you must complete the fast and then make up the fast a day later. After the month, you must make that day up later. تنبيه لا يضر ما حدث بعد النية من أكل أو شرب أو جماع أو نوم ما دام ذلك قبل الفجر. That there is no harm in making the intention to fast. Let's say it's Tuesday, and so Monday night we're going to make the intention that we're fasting tomorrow. Someone's seen the hilal. Abdul Salam Muhsin, he went out and he saw the hilal, and then Amina Khalifa, she she corroborated that. And so we've got two honest people who said that they saw the hilal, and so I'm going to make my intention to fast on Tuesday. But after that intention, you can eat, you can drink, you can have conjugal relations with your spouse, as long as that is before Fajr, right? As long as that is before Fajr. ومن أفطر متعمدا من غير تأويل قريب ولا جهل فعليه القضاء والكفارة. And whosoever deliberately breaks his fast without a ta'wil qarib and without ignorance, he must make up the day, and he must also expiate for it. And so ta'wil qarib, we're going to describe what that is, and there's also ta'wil ba'id, we'll describe what that is. So basically, a ta'wil qarib, right? Ta'wil qarib, what that means is huwa mastanada ila amrin muhaqqaq mawjud. And the ta'wil ba'id mastanada ila amrin mawhum ghayr muhaqqaq. So the ta'wil qarib, it'll be clear through the examples. It's basically where you have a circumstance that is that has obtained, right? There is a circumstance that has obtained. Whereas the ta'wil ba'id, there is a circumstance that is forged, right? There's a certain circumstance that is imagined or surmised, right? Okay, so that'll all be clear in the examples. So man aftara nasiyan fadhanna annahu. So these are examples of the ta'wil qarib, where you have the circumstance that actually obtains. Man aftara nasiyan fadhanna annahu la yajibu alayhi al-imsak li fasadi sawmihi fa'aftar. Right? A person, let's say you have a person who has deliberately broken his fast, right? But he deliberately, not deliberately, sorry. He broke his fast while forgetting, right? Like he forgot, he thought it was just like another day. He goes down and he takes a drink of water, right? Forgetting, right? فَظَنَّ أَنَّهُ لَا يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ الْإِمْسَاكِ لِفَسَادِ صَوْمِهِ فَأَفْطَرَ. So he breaks his fast, right? He breaks his fast on that water. Let's just say he drinks a sip of water, right? And then he says, I ruined my fast for the day. I ruined my fast for the day. And so he eats for the rest of the day, right? He's just like, I forfeited today, right? I'll make it up later. So this is what is called a ta'wil qarib, because what he should have done is continue fasting. He should have continued fasting. But because he surmised that he's got to break his fast now, because his fast is invalid, he's invalidated his fast, then he's got to make that day up. Whereas had he continued fasting, he would not have had to make that day up. من قدم من سفره قبل الفجر فظن إباحة الفطر في صبيحة تلك الليلة. All right, and so this is another example, that a person who comes back from travel, and you all know that if a person travels, he has the dispensation to eat. He doesn't have to fast if he's traveling. So he's traveling, and he returns home before Fajr, right? He turns home before Fajr, thinking that he's still in the mode of travel. Like he returns home, his bags are still in the car, right? His luggage is still in the car, and he's still sort of in that mental space of travel, right? Of being jet lagged, of not really feeling that he's settled at home, right? So when he comes back home before Fajr, because if he would have come back after Fajr, then that would have been a day of travel as well. But if he comes back home before Fajr, right, thinking that he's still in travel mode, and so فظن إباحة الفطر في صبيحة تلك الليلة. So he thought that that he can just continue eating, and for that day that he's at home now, for that day he's just not going to fast because he's still in travel mode. Then that person has to make up the fast. He's got to make it up. And then a third example, من أصابته جنابة ليلا فأصبح جنبا ولم يغتسل إلا بعد الفجر فظن بطلان صومه فأفطر. It's the person who has in conjugal relations, right? In conjugal relations, he did not wash himself after conjugal relations until after Fajr came in. Right? After Fajr came in. And so he thought that because I didn't purify myself after conjugal relations before Fajr came in, while it was still night, then I basically invalidated the fast, and so he continues to eat. No, that person has to make that day up again, because it is okay to wake up after Fajr in a state of janaba, in a state where you need to ritually bathe yourself. It's okay, and that does not invalidate the fast. It does not render it invalid. The fast is still valid, and you still must fast, but if you thought that I've invalidated my fast, then you have to make that day up. And another example, من احتجم في نهار رمضان فظن إباحة الفطر. Whoever goes to a cupper to get cupping done during the daytime of Ramadan, thinking that this has also invalidated his fast and that it is permissible for him now to eat, that person also has to make that day up, because going to a cupper does not invalidate the fast. فَهَذَا كُلُّهُ فِيهِ الْقَضَاءُ فَقَط. So all of these, what he has to do, all of these examples, what he has to do is make up the day that he missed. لأن الكفارة إنما تجب لانتهاك حرمة الشهر ولا انتهاك من هؤلاء. And so there's two things at work here. Whether you have qada or you have qada and kafara, right? Which means qada is to make up the day, qada and kafara is to make up the day and to expiate for it. And expiation, right? Expiation is one of three. You fast 60 days, 2 months in a row, or you feed 60 people, or you free a slave, right? So those are the three. And in the Mālikī madhab, you have your choice among all three of those. You don't. That's not in that order, but you have your choice among all three of those. And so, for the examples that we gave right now, where it was basically based on ignorance, thinking that I invalidated my fast and I might as well just eat, right? For this person, he only has qada, which means he must make up the fast, but there's no expiation for it. There's no penalty associated with it, and this is what is known as a ta'wil al-qarib, right? Ta'wil al-qarib. Now, مثال التأويل البعيد, right? And so the ta'wil ba'id is when you have to do kafara, is where you have to expiate, right? ومثال التأويل البعيد من انفرد برؤية هلال رمضان ولم تقبل شهادته عند الحاكم فظن إباحة الفطر فأفطر. So you have a person who goes and he says, I have seen the hilal. I saw it with these two eyes. I saw the hilal. And the judge says, what you must have seen was a mistake. It could have been a swan who was flying next to the right, who was flying next to a dome or something like that. And so I'm sorry, you didn't see the hilal. We don't believe you. And so, okay, the hakim just gave me the verdict. The judge just gave me the verdict that I can't, that Ramadan is not tomorrow. So I guess I'll just I'll go and get myself a burger and lament over the fact that no one believes me. And he's eaten his burger and he's drinking his fountain drink there, And so for this person, he must expiate kafara and qada. both, right? There's kafara and qada. So he's got to make the day up, and he's also got to do kafara, right? So he makes the day up and he feeds 60 people, or he makes the day up and he fasts 60 days, or he makes the day up and he frees someone who's enslaved. And so this is what he has to do, right? Because this is a ta'wil ba'id. And the ta'wil ba'id, he knows that this is, like, he knows that this is, he's got certainty here. That whereas the other ones didn't have certainty. ومن كانت عادته الحمى أو كانت عادتها الحيض فعجل الفطر قبل الحصول. So whoever gets a fever, I get a fever after Asr every day. Like that's just my condition. I get a fever after Asr every day. Or a woman who is so in tune with her cycle that she knows that today I'm going to expect my cycle. Today's the day I'm going to expect my cycle, because I usually get my cycle at 10 a.m. every every first Tuesday of the month. 10 a.m. is where I get my cycle. It's been the case for the past several years. Around 10, 11 a.m. it hasn't been different. And so 10 a.m. comes on that Tuesday and she's just breaking her fast. But then the cycle doesn't come. Right, or even if the thing is, what this is ta'wil ba'id. She has to come up with that day again and do the kafara, expiate for it as well. Let's see. ومن اغتاب أحدا فظن أنه أفسد صومه فأفطر ففي ذلك القضاء والكفارة. And whoever backbites against someone, right? You backbite against someone and you think that, okay, I've invalidated my fast and so I might as well eat. Well, you have to make up that day again and you have to expiate for it, right? Just like we spoke about yesterday, the Prophet ﷺ said that there are 5 things that break the fast. They break the fast at a spiritual level. Right? They break the fast at a spiritual level, but you have to continue fasting, right? You don't just backbite people and say, like if we did that, if we thought that every time I sinned, I have to eat that day and make up the day later, you're never going to be able to make up the days because we're sinning every day, right? So we're talking about the spiritual. The Prophet ﷺ there is talking about the spiritual level, right? Let's see. Anwa' al-kafara. Okay, so these are, now that we're talking about kafara, which is expiation, the different types of expiation. Al-kafaratu takunu bi ahadi thalathati anwa'in ala takhyir. So kafara is one of 3 types, and these you have an option among these 3, right? Because they're in a certain order in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that order does not tell us fa, or thumma. It tells us aw, right? So aw means that you have or and or. All right, so you do this or this or this, and the meaning there is that you have the option among the 3. فالأول إطعام 60 مسكينا لكل واحد مد بمده صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وهو ملء اليدين المتوسطتين لا المقبوضتين ولا المبسوطتين وقدره العلماء بثلث القدح وهو الأفضل وبالوزن 2.5 كيلوغرام. Okay, or kilograman ونصف. All right, so it's feeding 60 feeding 60 indigent people, right? Or for every one of them is a mud, and a mud is where you have 2 hands come together. They're the size of 2 hands of an average size man. Right, the size of two man's average hands that are neither curled nor flattened out, but just like this here, right? And so as much as you can put in there, that is 1 mud, right? That is 1 mud, and that is what is owed to the poor of grain or rice or something like that, right? And it's about $10 today. You know, we just consider it They just consider it $10. Naam, and so the scholars considered it 1/3 of a tumbler, right? And that's better, or that which weighs 2.5 kilograms, right? 2.5 kilograms. So wathani, which is interesting. How is it 2.5 kilograms? That's interesting. Yeah, I need to look into that. Because you can't get 2.5 kilograms of rice in that amount of it. So what do they mean by that? Yeah, I'll have to look at that. Okay, so don't quote me on the 2.5 kilograms just yet, because I've got to figure out what that means. والثاني صيام شهرين متتابعين فإن أفطر في يوم عمدا بطل جميع ما صامه واستأنفه ولعذر يبني على ما صامه. And so the second type here of kafara or expiation is fasting 60 consecutive days, right? Fasting 60 consecutive days, which means that you get to day number 59 and you say, tomorrow, I don't think I can do it. Then you've got to do another kafara. After that, you've got to do another kafara, which is either fasting another 60 days, or freeing someone who's enslaved, or feeding 60 indigent people, and those days that went by, those just went by, right? They're not. You can't switch them out, right? You can't switch them out and say, I fasted 60 days and I fasted 59 days. I missed one day. So for that one day that I missed, I'm going to feed one poor person. It doesn't work like that. صيام شهرين متتابعين فإن أفطر في يوم عمدا بطل جميع ما صامه واستأنفه. Okay, so if he has broken his fast one day deliberately, all of his previous days are invalid, and he must go from the beginning again. وَلِعُذْرٍ يَبْنِي مَا عَلَى مَا صَامَهُ, unless he deliberately broke his fast on the expiation, but he had an excuse, he had a valid excuse. And in that case, then he builds on what he has already fasted. So let's say you've got to day number 50 of 60 days, and you're traveling, or you're sick, or something like that happens, and there's a necessity, and you deliberately break your fast, then you go from after your travel or after your sickness, you go to day number 51. But if you just get tired of it and say, you know what, I'm just like, I can't take it in 60 days. I couldn't take 30 days of Ramadan. How am I going to do 60 days? And I'm just tired. I'm worn out. And so you eat that day, then you go all the way back to day number 1. والثالث عتق رقبة مؤمنة كاملة ويكفر السيد عن أمته إن وطئها ولو أطاعته والزوج عن زوجته إن أكرهها لا إن طاوعته. Okay, so this is a little bit of a controversial statement here, because these rulings are related to certain circumstance in society where there were people who were enslaved, right? And because of that, there are rulings then that govern that relationship. And so, عتق رقبة مؤمنة, and it's mentioned in the Quran that freeing someone who's enslaved is one of the ways of expiating for the sin of eating deliberately without a good excuse during Ramadan, which is incredibly profound. That in order to get back on the good side of God, and in order to be reconciled unto my Lord, after I have deliberately broken my fast by approaching my wife, or by eating, or by drinking, one of the ways that I can get good with God is to go and find someone who is enslaved and manumit him, right? Like, that has nothing to do with this, right? I just ate during Ramadan, right? And and in order to make up for that, freeing a slave. So it shows it shows the trajectory that the prophetic guidance really put us on as a community in ridding ourselves as a historical ummah of this institution. But as long as that institution was in existence, there were going to be rulings, and there are rulings that are there in place to govern that institution and to ensure that there is relative justice that can be served, and that there is no abuse of that relationship. So part of that is basically if a woman gives birth, right, then she and her child are manumitted, and she becomes walad and no longer a slave, walad, right? And so this is one of the ways that eradicates the cyclical continuation of slavery, that slavery is inherited, right? And so at a generational level, it allows for that institution to be weaned, right? For society to be weaned of that institution, because you cannot inherit slavery. Itqun raqaba, and basically, I mean, you had warring tribes, and so they would take basically the prisoners of war, and they would, that was the slave supply. The slave supply were basically prisoners of war. Okay. عتق رقبة مؤمنة كاملة. So it is the freeing of someone who's enslaved, who is a believer, so he has to be a Muslim, kamila, which means that that you have to take upon yourself the freeing of that slave in its entirety, in the entirety of the expense. So in other words, if it costs a certain amount of money to manumit a slave, you can't go into that with someone else, right? Because you've got to take that responsibility fully yourself. So that's what kamila means there. وَيُكَفِّرُ السيد عن أمته إن وطئها ولو أطاعته. And someone who has a slave girl and has engaged in conjugal relations with her during Ramadan, he must be the one to expiate for himself and expiate for her, even if she even if consent, regardless of consent, right? Regardless of consent. So let's just say that there's a situation where, regardless of consent, it was against her will or it was with her consent. Regardless, he has to do the expiation for himself and for her, right? So he's got to fast 120 days straight, consecutive, or feed 120 people, or free 2 slaves. And in that case, the best thing to do would be to free herself, right? وَالزَّوْجِ عَنْ زَوْجَتِهِ إِنْ أَكْرَهَهَا لَا إِنْ طَاوَعَتْهُ. And the husband must do the expiation for his wife if he has forced himself upon her, but not if she willingly gave her consent and participated, right? And so we're not really going to get into the issue of marital rape and all of the implications of that, but we're just talking about a situation where a husband forces himself upon his wife, and in that situation, he has to do the expiation for himself and for her, and she doesn't have to do the expiation because it was against her will. If it was with her will and with her consent and with her pleasure, her contentment with it, then she has to do it on her own and he has to do it on his own. وإذا أكره امرأة على الزنا لنفسه وجبت عليه كفارتها. And if a man has fornicated with a woman and done so by way of raping her, or if due to her circumstance he has placed a condition upon her saying that if you want such and such, then you've got to give me such and such. If he has placed her in that kind of a situation, then he must do the expiation for himself and for her. And obviously, there's a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, he needs to be put in jail. He needs to be, there's a lot more that needs to be done. But we're just talking about, okay, now, how does the fasting get expiated for, right? And that's what this whole section is about. So it's not really going to take us down the other rulings related to this dynamic or this crime. وإذا أفطر في النفل عمدا وجب عليه القضاء. And if he deliberately breaks his fast in a voluntary fast, right? If he deliberately breaks his fast, then he must expiate for that voluntary fast, right? Not expiate. He must make up that voluntary fast. So this is another way that we see the Mālikīs are very strict with all of our acts of worship like this, that even if it's a voluntary fast, it's a voluntary fast, right? You've entered into a voluntary fast. Like, I'm going to fast Tuesday. I'm just going to fast Tuesday, just to fast. And you break your fast because you're the guest in someone's home or something. You like then you make that fast up. And the same thing that if you're the host and you wanted to fast and then a guest comes and you say, oh, he's a guest who's coming, I need to eat with him to encourage him to eat, then you make that day up. Right, you make that day up. And this is something that is particular to the Mālikī madhab. There may be the similar things in the other madhab, but this is something that is particularly special about the Mālikī madhab, that we take our acts of worship seriously, we take our intentions seriously, even if those intentions are in voluntary acts, we see those acts through, right? We must see those acts through. لا إن أفطر بعذر فلا قضاء عليه, except if he has a valid excuse, and that valid excuse would be like he falls sick or he travels or something like that. Then he doesn't have to make that day up. ومن أفطر ناسيا أتم ولا قضاء عليه, and whoever eats while forgetting, right, that he's actually fasting, then he doesn't have anything to make up. He can have a full course meal. Like he can eat and eat and eat. They could take him out to an all-you-can-eat buffet. He can come back full, right, and say, "No," right? He doesn't have to make that day up, as long as he continues in his fast. He resumes his fast, and there's a hadith to the effect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tasaddaqa alayhi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him in charity. Allah has spent charity on him. نعم. وليس على من أفطر في قضاء رمضان متعمدا قضاء على الأرجح وإنما عليه قضاء الأصل فقط. And the person who deliberately eats in his making up the day of Ramadan, right? So let's say you have a woman on her cycle and she's making up the days of Ramadan after Ramadan, and she deliberately eats on the day that she's actually making up her fast from Ramadan, right? So let's say she's got 6 days to make up or whatnot. On day number 3 that she's already got 2 days out of the way. Day number 3, she's making up that day, and then she deliberately eats on that day, right? With or without an excuse. Does she now have to do kafara for that day, right? Does she have to expiate for that day? Does she have to fast 60 days for that day? Does she have to feed 60 people for that day? Does she have to free someone who's enslaved for that day? No, right? Because the kafara is related to the asl, which is Ramadan itself. It's not related to qada. It's not related to the days that you're making up. It's related to the root itself, which is the origin, which is the month of Ramadan. And so that brings us to a stop, a screeching halt, and we are at 12 o'clock right now. And so let us stop here, inshallah, and we will continue at our scheduled time, inshallah ta'ala. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.